Welcome to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry. In every episode, we explore how people from educators and artists to executives and entrepreneurs lead with authenticity, rise through adversity, and share the wisdom they've gained along the way. Today's guest is Dr. Jack Haynes, psychologist, ethics expert, author, educator, and former chair of the Michigan Psychology Licensing Board. Over the course of his career, Jack has conducted more than 700 child custody evaluations, testified in court more than 175 times, delivered over 100 professional presentations, and spent decades at the intersection of psychology, ethics, leadership, and the law. His work has given him a unique perspective on human behavior, trust, accountability, and decision-making in high-stakes situations. His latest book, Ethical Challenges for Mental Health Professionals, Your Questions Answered, is a practical guide to navigating ethical dilemmas in everyday professional practice through real-life examples, case studies, and thoughtful discussion around issues such as confidentiality, informed consent, and professional boundaries. In today's conversation, we'll explore what Jack's decades of experience have taught him about ethics, leadership, trust, and the responsibility that comes with helping people through some of life's most difficult moments. Jack, welcome to Expressions of Leadership. It's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you here today.
Now, Jack, you've spent decades studying human behavior in some incredibly high-stakes environments. What first drew you toward psychology?
Well, I would say it was in undergraduate days, probably even freshman year. I started noticing with my first psychology class the richness and complexity of human behavior, and I was doing that from an 18-year-old's perspective. But I was fascinated by it early on. I was fascinated with human behavior prior to that, but I had never had a psychology course, such as high schools now often have them, but didn't have it then. So I was fascinated with all the different aspects of human behavior, possibilities in that. And I would say probably simultaneous with that, I was interested in how to understand it, how to view it, how to organize it, since there's so much complexity to it. So I would say that probably was when it all started and continues. I'm still fascinated by it.
Well, you said that you've never met a boring person and everyone has their own story. What continues to fascinate you about people after all these years?
Yeah, I would definitely say that again. After all these years in practice and that, I don't think I'm jaded by any of it. Yeah, I mean, everyone has their own story, whatever context you see them in. And the two major contexts that I would be talking about would be, in no particular order, psychotherapy, in which you have an individual relationship, and an evaluation, in which it's a different aspect. You're not an advocate for the person, you're only trying to understand them. So it's more removed, you might say, in a sense. But everyone has their own story, and I have not ever tired of hearing all the different stories and respecting them that people have had and how they handle the experience, because so much of it in life depends on how one deals with experiences that come your way. You can't control, of course, all sorts of things that come your way in life. But the question is, how do they handle them, including, severe adverse experiences, let's say. So how do people cope with those sorts of situations? And sometimes adversity is handled in a way that ends up being a success in some, definition of the word. So, yeah, it's endlessly fascinating to me.
And then your interest in ethics in particular began pretty early, from your Jesuit high school experience to philosophy and ethics courses at the University of Michigan. What stayed with you from those early influences?
Well, I think part of it is the idea of choice generating. And of course, when you work in psychotherapy, oftentimes that is a framework you use there. But in general, with adolescence, adolescence is nothing if not a time of life in which there's tremendous generation of choices, options, and so forth, and some of them not too functional. Act on some of them, don't act on of them, other oppose parents and other authority figures in different ways. So adolescence is a lot about dealing with that. So that may have been some aspect of it. Another aspect of it, I'd say, for me was when I got to college. I majored in psychology, and I was fortunate in having certainly outstanding psychology instructors at U of M as an undergrad, but also in philosophy, such as Dr. Frankena, and there was probably the most famous ethics professor from Oxford. It's very interesting and more practical than some of the philosophy courses that one could take. So that was, I think, the origin of it, and it's continued, and some of my professional positions I've held have been consistent with that, such as the licensing board and American Psychological Association ethics committee I was on for 3-year term, and I was a chair one of the years. And so those interests continue, and since then, of course, too. And of course, the book is one of the outcomes of that.
Well, what have you learned about leadership from serving in positions where difficult ethical decisions had to be made?
Well, yeah, I worked, one of the positions I held was at a court, and I worked in two segments, totaling 14 years there. And it's certainly related to ethics because one of the things in a large system like that, which is very decision making oriented and has a lot of power, a court system, um, power and authority, um, learned how to manage that. I was the head of the department. It was research training and clinical services, so it was also broad. But essentially, it was the clinic and other aspects that were somewhat clinical associated with it. And one of the things I learned from, especially the my first of the two mentors there, who was the chair of the unit, was how to prioritize, how to make decisions on important things, what sort of priorities you establish, how to work with others, and a lot of it too was focusing on our developmental or excuse me, departmental goals in the context of the larger organization, a court with like 300 employees. And some of it had to do with turf protecting, it's a bureaucratic type of a situation. So I would say those are some of the main features that I learned about leadership and ethics, and they were both very ethical people, but it was a challenging environment to function in, especially as pretty young at that point in time.
How would you define ethical leadership today?
One of the ways you see it is in political life. I'm not going to get into politics, but consistency is very important. One of the main things I follow there, and I follow in actually in my life, also are some of the basic ethical principles which apply certainly to ethical leadership of the American Psychological Association. The ethical code for APA, American Psych Association, is two aspects, principles, and the other one is standards. The standards are more actionable, but the first part is, you might say, the philosophy, the broadest operating principles. I'll just mention them very briefly, but I think they're a good rule for a living for most people, I think. First one is your actions should reflect beneficence and non-maleficence. In other words, um, focus positively on working with people, but also don't do harm, essentially, non-maleficence. So that is certainly an underlying principle for ethical leadership at any point, but certainly now. The other ones too, just briefly, fidelity and responsibility. That's a second ethical general principle. It has to do with establishing trust, accepting responsibility, these sorts of things as a professional person. And like I said, these really apply to non-professional, certainly non-psychological environments. Integrity is another aspect of being essentially accurate, honest, truthful. Um, Justice is the fourth principle, and I certainly would say that that's a key issue in ethical leadership is fairness and equality. In other words, justice and respect for the rights and dignity of others, which is very central for psychologists, including in applied areas like rights to privacy, confidentiality, those sorts of things. So I would say those are key things that certainly in my profession, and I think just more broadly, any sort of ethical leadership approach.
Now, I'd like to double click on this idea of trust. What role does trust play in leadership and ethics in your view?
Yeah, well, it is central because it is the basis of relationships that are cooperative. And certainly all sorts of relationships in life, most of them are cooperative, whether it's an employee and an employer, or a patient and a client, or a physician and a patient, all sorts of formats. It's relevant. You can't really, I mean, you can talk differently about institutional trust and individual trust, but ultimately predictability, reliability, the basis for making informed decisions. Um, Needless to say, in our current world, political events and that, there's a lot of polarization, which results in fact picking sides and so forth from failures of trust. You got to trust somebody, so to speak, so things become bifurcated and people pick sides and sometimes construct sides. But trust is essential in relationships, whether individual or in different kind of a format, organizations, or even international relationships. If there's a lack of trust, and there are a number of examples, of course, in the world, that leads to a very problematic, ongoing, sometimes dangerous consequences. So trust is the central quality of human behavior, and even like you've talking, most fundamental of all, child development, a child developing. Some of the key things are the development of trust based on the relationship with the caregivers, and the failure of development of trust can lead to a very significant and generally speaking irreversible damage later on if it continues without respite for long periods of time. Sometimes in stereotypic, I say orphanages, and that you can see there's a lack of a capacity for a child to trust anyone in those environments, caregivers and others, and that can lead to very critical and problematic relationships lifelong. It's a very essential part of human development.
Let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll dive into Jack's years conducting child custody evaluations, what those experiences revealed about communication breakdowns, and why he ultimately decided to step away from that work. Stay with us. Leadership isn't just about strategy, it's about people. The Forward Project helps organizations cultivate strong, adaptable leaders who create thriving workplace cultures. If you're ready to invest in your leadership team, visit www.theforwardproject.co to learn how. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and today I'm speaking with psychologist, ethics expert, and author Dr. Jack Haynes about ethics, trust, leadership, and the realities of human behavior in high stakes situations. Now, Jack, you conducted more than 700 child custody evaluations over 35 years. What did that work teach you about people during moments of crisis and conflict?
Yes, yeah, those were also, it's important to state that those typically were not run-of-the-mill divorces. They were, I would say, all high conflict. In other words, the reason that they were referred to a psychologist for a large workup, which involved assessing everyone in the family, not only the parents, but also the children, the relationship between the children, child or children, and each of the parents. They were high conflict matters, so they weren't just people down the street are getting divorced and this is how it goes and they're routinely referred. That wasn't the case. So these are all high conflict. Usually there were cases that had come to the attention of the judge as that, and the judges were frustrated, and they would have motion hearings each week. Like they couldn't get them out of their courtroom. There were so many conflicts that the court was called upon to decide on a weekly basis, things like that. So they were, that's a general context. But I would say, in general, it would be a fair statement to say that very often in those circumstances, you're seeing people, so to speak, at their worst, in the sense that they are so stressed, so anxious, often angry, depressed, agitated, antagonistic toward a key person in their life, namely their spouse. And of course, additional to the situation, whether they're cohabiting or not, this also is disruptive in various ways, this kind of a climate, to parent-child relationships. Added on top of that, sometimes, not uncommon, would be financial threats. All sorts of threats between the parties, oftentimes about the relationship. Oftentimes, there was also disruption in the relationship, like with grandparents. In a lot of these high conflict cases that I dealt with, the grandparents weren't even seeing the grandchildren, who are the children I'm evaluating. They weren't even seeing them because of the rift in the family. Again, polarization, lots of untrusting behavior. And even a lot of times there was disruption. People pick sides. Friendships are disrupted. A couple may have a friend or a couple friend with whom they have a good relationship with a long period of time, and a lot of times for multiple reasons. Sometimes people just want to stay out of it. So lots of conflict, a lot of stress and distress. Um, so that was the reason I was involved, and I was called upon to assess each of the individuals, the children as well as the parents, and like I said, observe them, what the relationship is like. People can allege all sorts of things in those kinds of situations because they have a desire to get custody or certain type of custody or whatever, as the case may be, and they may exaggerate or minimize all sorts of things. So you've got to collect a lot of data. So it was a really very difficult time, and one of the things that teaches an evaluator is it's very important to have as much information as is possible from different perspectives, and you contact the teachers, um, sometimes even dentists or the general practitioner, the PCP, just to see how these folks relate to each other, how the children doing. So you need a wide variety of information, and I think that's one of the things that's very important. The goal is ultimately, in most of the cases, is the courts wanted a recommendation of what I thought would be um, a reasonable solution, such that it's a solution that is in the best interests of the child or children. So that was ultimately what the goal was, but it can't be, because it's so important, it can't be an impressionistic situation. It's many, many hours, sometimes dozens of hours of time, and you don't see them once, you see them more than once for consistency over time. Because children sometimes, unfortunately, just realistically, can sometimes be a bargaining chip. And you have to cut through that and see what the real relationships have been. And the focus always was on trying to understand by testing and interview and collateral contacts and so forth, what kind of person and what kind of parent each of the parents was, not the kind of spouse they were. That's a different story, not really part of what I was focused on. So that was the general context, and learning about all the different aspects of these situations is very important before one starts going down a path. You got to prevent yourself from going down paths too soon till you have lots of data and you can think about it, you can observe, evaluate things, and it's a big responsibility. But I found it was a very maturing experience in some ways, certainly professionally maturing, because of the diverse experiences that you have with people under a lot of stress.
What did you learn about communication breakdowns in families that can also apply to workplaces and leadership teams?
Yeah, well, certainly the idea of common goals is very important. We're talking about trust in individual relationships, but there's also trust in business relationships of a different kind that are very important for relationship of the individual to the team, to the organization, and also relationship among the individuals. In the custody sort of situation, people drifted apart, and of course, that would be destructive in the analog form, in a business context in which people are isolated. They're not part of the team, so to speak. They're just kind of doing their own thing, putting their own time. I mean, of course, it can take all sorts of forms, but certainly in organizations, I would say understanding and keeping roles clear and in focus is very important for uh, avoiding breakdown, so to speak, in types of relationships in a work environment.
Now, you eventually discontinued custody work due to increasing legal risks and changes in the environment surrounding family law. How did you make that decision? Because I know this was something that you really cared about.
Yes, I certainly did and still do, but I decided a few years ago, as in 3 or 4. I don't know. People always reference things about the pandemic. I don't know that that had anything to do with it, although evaluations did certainly slow down for obvious reasons during the pandemic. But maybe it gave time to consider these things. Working in custody areas has always been high risk and sometimes very high risk. But the key thing for me was on a very individual, personal basis, in that not very many people are in this specialty area. And there were 3 people that I knew very well, and I knew the quality of their work. And all 3 of these people uh, got in trouble with the state licensing board. Now, as mentioned earlier, the former head of the licensing board, and I was actually on the licensing board a total of 12 years. I was chosen 3 times for short term and then 2 longer terms by the governor. That's how you get on the licensing board. And it was very problematic because I knew these people were all ethical, and 2 of them were extremely highly skilled people that you could really trust in their work. And I know from being on the licensing board, it can become a labyrinth and a real problem if you get involved with them. And it's how to disentangle yourself. There's a speech I give sometimes to psychologists, how to avoid the licensing board. And that is a very worthy goal. And the answers aren't always obvious. But these folks, despite efforts, did become involved. And I decided At this stage of the game, frankly, I think I'm going to emphasize other things, which were other kinds of evaluations, including criminal evaluations and others like guardianships and um, various other sorts of evaluations that have different kinds of applications. So I guess from a negative example, in a sense, I moved in that direction, and it's been fine. I still do consulting with attorneys, and sometimes judges call me about they've got a real problem with this case, and one of them recently called and said, "You've got to help me keep these people out of my courtroom, Jack. You've got to do this." So I did what I could in terms of suggestions. But that goes with the territory. But it was the legal risk, and I just decided at this point emphasize other things, and I'm glad it's worked fine.
Well, we're going to take another short break, and when we return, we'll explore Jack's current work in criminal psychology and what his experience has taught him about accountability, humanity, and leadership. We'll be right back. Are you looking to connect with an audience passionate about leadership, growth, and success? Become a sponsor of Expressions of Leadership and align your brand with inspiring conversations that make an impact. Contact us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com to explore sponsorship opportunities. You're listening to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and today's guest is Dr. Jack Haynes, whose decades of experience in psychology, ethics, and forensic evaluation offer a remarkable lens into trust, accountability, and leadership. Jack, your work now focuses largely on criminal evaluations. What does that work involve day to day?
Yeah, there are different sorts. One of the more common ones is a judge may or the attorneys through the judge's request contact you about pre-sentence issues. And sometimes I've had judges call me directly and say, "I don't understand what's going on with this person, and could you do a psychological and illuminate what you think is going on? Because some of the behavior doesn't add up in a functional way, why they would be doing this repeatedly sometimes." So that's one context, like pre-sentence, you might say. Another two areas that are somewhat linked are competency and criminal responsibility, or insanity. In other words, criminal responsibility. Does the person lack capacity? So competency has to do with whether or not the person, there are different kinds of competency, but the main one is whether or not this person is sufficiently in touch with reality and has the capacity to work with his attorney. I say his or her attorney, of course, um, or not. And that's a competency determination. And insanity or criminal responsibility is the term, as an evaluation that's multiple facets. And the ultimate question is the conversational way is this person insane? And the question is really legally, are they criminally responsible? Should they be held criminally responsible for what they've done? And a lot of times the general public thinks everybody, so to speak, is doing this route, the insanity route. But that isn't the case. It's a very small percentage that do that, for the reason that an attorney who promotes or posits to the court an insanity defense is saying that their client did the crime or crimes, but the reason is they were insane. So if the insanity defense doesn't work out, they've already made essentially a statement that the person did it. So there's a high risk with that. And the risk is also high because not a very large percentage of people are found to be not criminally responsible, or as is often referred to as insanity. So it's very important because these are often very serious crimes. The majority of the ones that I've dealt with in insanity have been murder cases. And so one or more people have lost their lives as a result of the actions of this person. As so it appears. And the question is, should this person be held responsible or not? So you have to follow a very specific set of criteria, and you need a lot of data, reliable and valid data, to make that decision responsibly, which means that you need to look not only to the evaluation of the person, which may involve psychological testing, but also may involve witness reports to the crime, police reports, jail behavior. How did they act during the crime, if that's known? How were they functioning just before, like the day and days before, after, immediately after, just after? They have to review all sorts of records. Psychotropic medication, mood-related prescription medication for depression or psychosis. Is that involved? Substance use and abuse, is that involved? Mental health history, just in general, health issues. Are there any particular health issues? Certainly, intellectual level is relevant to what's going on. What is their current personality functioning? For a criminal responsibility, you have to ultimately focus on the time of the crime, of course, because that's what the law is written in terms of. But you need to understand the context. Is there a criminal past? Has the person done other things, or is this out of the blue, or so to speak? Again, thoroughness is very important in any sort of work like this, and it's important for everyone's best interest, including society, that approach be taken. So a lot of looking through all sorts of data that's relevant to the matter.
Well, what have these experiences taught you about accountability and responsibility and even human nature?
Well, certainly one of the things in working with people in these kinds of contexts is that human behavior is complex. Interpretation is very challenging, and you certainly must be careful that you have sufficient information about these sorts of things, whatever it is that you're asked to examine and sometimes opine about. Um, General operating principles, including being very alert and you're not sure what's going to come up as time goes on. Be very persistent, of course, and careful. Take your time, which is a good rule of thumb in all these sorts of things. And that's how a thorough and competent job is done. I can give you an interesting anecdote that might illustrate some of this. Very early in my career, and my career started in 1978, and this was probably that's when I got my doctoral degree, and this is probably about 1980 or so. And I was in a jail in a maximum security area in which a lot of these people were waiting sentence, and it was a fairly serious charge. It was not murder, but it was a very serious charge. So I was asked to evaluate. The judge called me and said, "Can you evaluate this fellow? I don't know what's going on. He's already been evaluated by two psychologists. One psychologist said, yes, he's mentally ill, and the other psychologist said, he is not." And he said, "So you're going to be the tiebreaker." He said, "I don't know what to do." He says, "Do what you can." I said, "Okay." So I went down and saw this person, and right away, one thing was quite apparent. He had no physical issue with speaking, but he was opting to essentially be mute. And this was not elective mutism. It was a lack of cooperation. It was clear. And he would just minimally answer what he felt like sometimes. He was giving me like 5 to 10% answers. Sometimes he would just kind of, make an expression, he would deal with it. So I figured, all right, I have to evaluate somebody who is choosing to do this. So let's see, how are we going to do this? So I'm talking and just trying, and I'm proceeding as if he's giving me answers and so forth. I figured, you know what? I think there's a problem here because he, at one point, it was a concrete cinder block wall room. Exceptional to that was one wall was half window and a door. And I noticed that he was not acting at all like a psychotic person. If a person were psychotic, and evaluated many people who are, they are not easily distracted by something, somebody walking by in the hallway or something. There's a no interest to them. They wouldn't ever look at that. And this guy repeatedly did that. So I thought that was interesting. So I figured, So it continued, and then in a few minutes, cinder block wall here. He turns and looks at the wall. There's no sounds. It's very quiet down there. He looks at this wall and says, "What?" And he looks back at me and thought, that is somebody mimicking mental illness. A mentally ill person would not look at a cinder block wall and say, "What?" as if someone were speaking to them. That just would not happen. So I thought, well, that's real interesting. Third thing, I thought, you know what? I bet you I can get this guy to come out of his role a little bit in one sense of the word. And this is since about a year after that. In my whole career, I used laptop computers. And did not at that time. I took actually notes with a ballpoint pen and a legal pad. So I thought, you know what? I bet you this guy is not nearly as out of it as he's presenting based on his looking at somebody repeatedly going by in the hallway and him looking at the wall and saying, "What?" So what I started to do is I took a very exaggerated, I had my pen in my hand, and I took a very exaggerated identical motion each time when I took notes. And I did this 4 or 5 times. Okay. The last time I did it, I didn't look down at the paper. I made exactly the same gesture, and I was looking at him, and he looked at me and he got startled. Again, a psychotic person would never react that way. That's just not in the cards. That's not what psychosis is. So, 3 strikes, so to speak. And I came to the conclusion that this guy was not psychotic based on other things, also, of course. But there was one more part coming. The other part coming was we went through this struggle for must have been 2.5 hours at least, and he refused to do other things. So I figured, okay. So I went out and told the guard we're done, and the guard put him in a holding cell just around the corner, not too far from where I was. And he goes in there and a couple other guys in there, and he just goes and sits down. So I walked around the wall and went down the hall about 50 feet and just stood there for about 5 minutes. Everybody thought I was gone. I then walked back, walked around, and walked right up to the front of the cell. And this guy is laughing, telling jokes, high fiving other people, the other 2 guys in the cell, uh, and having a good old time playing cards. So I figured this looks like feigned mental illness. Suddenly he's completely out of his psychotic doldrums. I felt that was one illuminating experience to spend a lot of time and be persistent and be a little bit creative, and and it paid off. And that's how he turned out to be. Judge wasn't he was happy, but he wasn't happy that the guy was doing this with the evaluator.
Yes. And what leadership lessons, in your view, emerge when people are forced to make decisions under fear or stress or uncertainty?
Yeah, well, if you select a negative and a positive type of a pattern, a negative type of a pattern would be, it depends on what the stress is and what the environment is, but a lot of times it can lead to like an impulsive response, or they're trying to diminish their personal distress, or they might just give real quick answers. Anxiety is often involved in these kinds of situations. So, I mean, they might go in that direction. Um, Another thing that could occur from that kind of a circumstance is for some people, it may actually lead them to think through things with greater clarity, instead of just, knee-jerk response or broader purpose. In other words, think more positively in terms of growth, whatever that might particularly mean in that situation for that person.
Well, we're going to take a brief pause, and when we return, we'll talk about Jack's new book, Ethical Challenges for Mental Health Professionals, Your Questions Answered, and the common ethical pitfalls that leaders face today. Don't go anywhere. True transformation starts from within. The Forward Project partners with organizations to create meaningful culture shifts and develop leaders who inspire real change. If your team is ready to move forward with purpose, visit www.theforwardproject.co. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and today I'm joined by Dr. Jack Haynes, psychologist, ethics expert, and author of the new book, Ethical Challenges for Mental Health Professionals, Your Questions Answered. Now, Jack, what inspired you to write this book, Ethical Challenges for Mental Health Professionals, Your Questions Answered, at this stage of your career?
Okay, great question. I would say there are multiple motivations for this. One of which is I've known my co-author for decades, and we used to work together at the court many years ago, and we've kept in touch in various ways, case conferences we do together on a monthly basis, and various things. So we know each other quite well, and we trust in each other. Talk about trust, like we have earlier today. But we decided that, what we think is a lot of the ethics books are not as practically oriented with applications, examples, and so forth. And secondly, most of the ethics books are directed at one profession. What if, because mental health practice is diverse, how about if we incorporated the five major mental health professions in there? Since there are mostly similarities, no real contradictions, but there's some dissimilarities, differences of emphasis in that. How about if we did that and had a lot of vignettes and, again, a practical approach? Now, ethical decisions are not a cookbook, so there's no such thing as that. But we wanted to use our experience in a survey of different areas, and the book is organized in 21 different chapters, and most of them are topical areas like confidentiality and a variety of things like that, and organize it in a practical kind of a way that is applicable for all the different professions in mental health. So it was exciting to do that, and especially when the American Psychological Association said that they were interested and go ahead and write more than a couple of chapters, and we'll take a look. And they liked what they saw, and they still seem to like what they saw. So we're thrilled that it's in print.
Well, what are some of the most common ethical blind spots that professionals encounter without even realizing it?
Well, I think boundary violations, if you look at surveys of licensing boards, and that usually is right in there, almost all of them right near the top. They may be, for example, focusing on personal reactions. It's interesting to talk about this with the client. Is that in the best interest of the client? What does that have to do with, what the client has been struggling with and challenged with and so forth? So emphasizing, I would say one of the things is emphasizing the best interests of the client. The therapeutic relationship is not an equal relationship like two friends. You're not buddies, and you never will be buddies with your client. The arrows, so to speak, all go one way toward the best interest of the client. It's not an equal or balanced relationship, and it certainly shouldn't be. So boundaries are critical, and best interest of the client is one way to keep that in mind. Another thing I think is very important, and we emphasize in our book too, is discussing and consulting in situations you have questions about, or troubled by, or wonder about. Consult with a trusted, experienced colleague. That works very well, and it doesn't absolutely guarantee that there are not going to be problems, let's say later, but it's a wise move to make to also help you think through situations. I mean, I can't think of a case that offhand that I have ever encountered on any ethics committee or ethics body or the licensing board in which the person did that and made a good faith effort and thought about it and concluded this is the best thing to do. I can't think of any case where that happened. That's usually not what happens. These decisions are made for whatever reason, sometimes based on an emotional component, and they're not really discussed with a trusted, knowledgeable colleague. And if so, most likely that would probably redirect the mental health professional. So, case consultation, case discussion, obviously all very highly confidential, is important in that.
Now, in the business world, what are the warning signs that a leader or organization might be drifting ethically?
Well, the first thing when you talk to folks who get involved with this is a lot of times they have a passing thought that, well, maybe I should be doing this. I don't know. I think it's okay, and then they rationalize. So, taking a look at your first reaction, that doesn't mean it's always correct, but it might be. It might lead you on a path, and that's when you can, consult with another person in the organization, for example, uh, about that. Yeah, that is a sort of a um, brainstorming aspect, and in organizations that don't allow for those sorts of interactions, I think put themselves somewhat at greater risk when people don't feel free to do that and to be flexible thinkers when they have some questions. But leadership role modeling is very important. I mean, a lot of times it can happen that a business leader thinks, well, those things apply to them and didn't really apply to me. But the idea of, depending on what the organization is, being able to speak to whoever the person at the level above you is, that can be very important too. It's flexibility is introduced in that situation.
Well, what advice would you give leaders or professionals trying to navigate ethical gray areas where maybe there's not an obvious right answer?
Yeah, well, what is helpful too is many different professions, some of them business organizations, not just professional and like mental health professional organizations, but they also they have many of them have ethics codes, and those are worth reviewing. A lot of times people think, "Gee, I didn't know we had an ethics code in my profession," or this level of it, people um, involved with that. I mean, that's always something also to examine to see if there are ethical principles or related to it, and it just gets you thinking. Also, if even if there isn't an exact match for your kind of business organization or business endeavor that you're involved with, but it can get you thinking in terms of things like best interests of if you're the boss, best interests of the clients, your employees, those sorts of things.
We're going to take one final break. And when we come back, we'll talk about Jack's vision for the future, the legacy he hopes to leave behind, and we'll close with our wisdom and whimsy segment. You won't want to miss it. Don't miss a thing. Follow Expressions of Leadership on your favorite podcast app and connect with us on Instagram and YouTube at Expressions of Leadership. You're listening to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and today's guest is Dr. Jack Haynes, psychologist, ethics expert, author, and longtime leader in the field of forensic and ethical psychology. Now, Jack, as you look ahead, what is your vision for how organizations and professionals can create cultures where trust and accountability and ethical decision making are more deeply embedded into everyday practice?
Yeah, I would say that familiarity in a constructive, positive way between leaders in an organization and the employees, whatever the structure is, but familiarity and comfort level is important. If there could be some sort of interaction that is not totally formal, namely the leader talking at a podium to an assembled group, that would be helpful if it were possible for more flexibility and informality, whatever the requirements of the organization, would allow. Also, focusing on teamwork. It's so important for morale that when there is not a sense of that, people are tend to be just putting in their time, and that teamwork is a very important part of it, I would say.
And what legacy do you hope that your work leaves behind?
Yeah, well, thanks. That's a very interesting question. I would say one of the I'll be very specific. Um, One of the organizations that I was president for a while, namely a 1 year term, is the Michigan Psychological Association, and they had a lot of opportunities when one is president to initiate various things. One thing I initiated was an outstanding psychologist that I knew well, who had died a couple years earlier. And I thought, you know what? This person, she embodied so many wonderful qualities and for the organization and as a professional and as a person. I think that we should have a memorial award, I proposed, and it went and they did it. And I'll just mention briefly what the components are. And the punchline of the whole thing is one of the reasons I feel very good about this is that was 2006. So 20 years later, and it's an annual award, and it still is in effect. And they go through a whole procedure of selecting people and put out announcements. Who would you nominate and why? So I feel very good about that because it's very good for the organization, and also it's a fitting and well-deserved memorial for the person. And we have 800 people in the Michigan Psychological Association. So the qualities for this person that she embodied are volunteerism, initiative, perseverance, integrity, selflessness, and goodwill. So that was one of the things I felt very good about, that still goes on. And in general, too, it was a big responsibility being head of the of the state organization, Michigan Psychological, which is part of the national organization, APA. But it was very tough times then, economically and membership wise, for the organization. And we were about 2 years and 2 months from bankruptcy at one point. So that was a real challenge, and the people I worked with were very energetic and helpful, as were my successors. So that really was very gratifying to turn that around. And the MPA is pretty healthy and doing well now. So I would say those are a couple of things.
And for listeners who want to learn more about your work or your book or connect with you, where should they go?
Well, I have a website, Jack P. Haynes, middle initial, Jack P. Haynes, HAYNES.com. That would be one place. Also, LinkedIn. I'm involved with LinkedIn. So I would say those are the two main sources.
And now it's time for our wisdom and whimsy segment of the show, where I get to ask the guest one advice question and one fun question. Beginning with the advice question, what's one key piece of wisdom that has guided your life or career?
Yeah, that's a very substantial question. Um, it's hard to narrow it down, but I would say one of the things that strikes me as very, very important, central in some ways, is to be aware of the effects of your behavior. I think that is a good signpost, I would say.
And now for the fun question.
Mhm.
If you could have dinner with any philosopher, psychologist, or historical figure, who would it be and why?
Well, I'm going to take a chance that I can actually give two responses to that question. One is on a personal basis, and the other is a historic figure. The personal basis, I've referred to him earlier as William K. Frankena, a U of M philosophy professor, and he's my first experience at a college level with a philosophy class. And he himself has made outstanding contributions to ethics. I found he was an inspirational person on more than one level. He also, I felt, was a wise person from everything I knew about him then and subsequently. He's not just a wasn't just a learned person, but also a wise person in a broader sense. The other person, a historic personage who I would love to meet and have at a dinner party, would be Henry David Thoreau. And there are multiple reasons for him also, one of which would be his appreciation of nature and his understanding of the importance of simplicity in life. So I found him, not personally, didn't know him, but his writings, which I'm familiar with, inspirational and in many ways aspirational.
Well, Jack, thank you so much for being here today on Expressions of Leadership and for sharing your wisdom and your experience and your perspective. This conversation really highlights that ethical leadership is not simply about avoiding mistakes, but about creating cultures where trust and responsibility and care for others remain at the center of our decisions.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, if you found value in today's episode, we hope that you'll share it and continue these conversations within your own communities and organizations. Be sure to follow and subscribe to Expressions of Leadership wherever you listen to podcasts. And you can also join us on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and wherever leadership calls you next, I invite you to approach it with curiosity, courage, and the kind of integrity that earns trust over time. If you haven't done so already, make sure to click on that follow button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Have a guest you'd like us to interview? Questions, ideas, or just want to say hello? You can reach us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com or connect with us on Instagram or YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, thanks to our amazing team behind the scenes for making this podcast possible, including our sound engineer, Graham Palmer, and my chief encourager and advisor, Jeremiah Higgins.